Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the 8th webinar in our Babylon is Back Bootcamp series. Again, my name is Tom Dolan, CEO of the Town of Babylon IVA. Today's program is all about increasing revenues, specifically how to increase revenues during difficult times like the COVID-19 pandemic. I am joined today by Rob Fishman, owner and partner at Sandler Training. Rob was here a couple of weeks ago, and we're happy he's back. As we mentioned on our networking webinar, Rob has a business and management background that he has acquired for over 35 years in the business world. Rob currently works with clients ranging from local businesses to international organizations who seek improvement in their selling and client development processes. Thanks. Good to see you again, Rob, and thanks for joining us again.
Well, thanks for having me, Tom. It is good to be back. Happy to support the Babylon IDA and all of your members and fellow people that are engaged and working together. So I think it looks like you gave me permission to share my screen. All right, so we're going to talk today about what are some ways that I can effectively be better at getting mastery around the sales process. And especially now, more and more people are asking me, how do I get business? Some people might have been affected by COVID, the pandemic, and some people have found themselves in a position of not being in as good a place as they possibly could. So I'm going to spend some time today talking about what are some strategies that we can use in place of what currently we might be doing. It was really a question of not doing what I call doing different things now. It's really a question about doing the same things differently. I'm going to go through a couple of examples and scenarios about what are some of the common challenges that people in business are finding right now. First and foremost, I'm going to separate out two circles. One circle on this side will be about marketing, and the other circle on this side will be about sales. So I'm going to focus on this conversation today around the whole business development sales thing. So I'm going to give some steps as I go. I've got our presentation right up and running and ready to go with you today. But first and foremost, let's start here. You know, with all that's happened in the world and the craziness that's going on, is for us to recognize where we might be in this cycle right now. I talked a little bit about this last time, about seeing that the changes to what's happened to us locally in our environment, economically, even with health, that there's this sort of 5-step process we look at. Shock begins it all. Denial is the resistance that's following it by having to do things differently. I'd like to sort of focus on the exploration today and the commitment about what are some things we could be doing differently. As we know, the definition of insanity is defined as doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So we start off here and we ask ourselves this question. I could be doing more business. I could be selling more if only I could be doing this. And when I ask this question, I usually like to break it into two buckets. One bucket would be things that I have no control over, and another bucket would be things that I do have control over. For example, the amount of traffic that may be on the expressway, don't really have much control over that. The way the market goes up and down, don't really have much control over that. The weather is another example. But I want to focus on the things that we have control over. So when I typically put this question out for people, they'll look at this and they'll say, well, here are some of the things that I think may be the gap from where I am currently in my business, or if I sell for a living, here are some of the challenges that I hear. Many people will say to me, you know, we're just not getting in front of enough new opportunities on a regular, consistent basis. We call those the at-bats, if you will. Some may find, especially in this environment now, they can't get people on the phone. They're not able to reach these buyers or their target audience. Now, especially now, people are lowering their price to try to get more market share. So their competition is lowering their price, which we know is not sustainable in the long term, but we're seeing a lot of people do that. Some that are doing proposals or the RFQs, requests for quotes, they may be doing a whole lot of them, but finding that they're not getting as many of those proposals accepted back and business moving along. Some may feel that they're chasing people. They're just knocking on the door. Hey, you ready to talk to me? You ready to buy from me? Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? So they're in this chase mode, and the buyer is just pretty much avoiding that conversation. Another one is that there's this reluctance that people have that they don't want to be seen as being pushy, aggressive. If you remember that TV show, WKRP Cincinnati, with Herb Tarlick, who was the guy with the plaid jacket, the sales guy, that most people in the business development business don't want to be perceived that way. We know now with people working from home, it's probably the majority of people out there still, is they're not able to effectively work from home in as good a job as they possibly could. And then another one is about, hey, if I could be hitting my targets, right? So these are some of the common sales challenges that we see, but I will go back to the first point that most people are just not in front of enough new opportunities consistently. And that's a challenge. But I want to break this down into two separate camps. On the right side of this page, you'll see what we call the behavior, attitude, technique triangles. Real success in business development is mapped out into all three parts of this triangle. And on the left of the screen, you're going to see about breaking these issues into two camps. One is, it is a technical issue or a conceptual issue. For example, when it comes to asking about money or what we call a budget step, some people may be very fearful because they might have grown up in a home where it might have been impolite to talk about money or money was scarce. That's a conceptual issue. Our money concept gets in the way of us being able to execute a good budget step. But on the technical side, it may be, I don't know how to ask those questions. So those are the two issues that I've separated out. But now let's look at this magnificent triangle of success. If we look at the top part of any kind of sales issue, we're going to break it into attitude. And that the average human mind processes about 60,000 thoughts per day, which is an astounding number. You can try to think of one thing for more than a minute. It will give you a raging headache. But up on attitude, we're going to talk about ourselves, the company we either own or work for, and the market that we're in. Are we in a competitive market? Sure. What is our thought process about what happens when we get rejected? In business development, rejection is part of the game. And how well we recover from rejection is all part of the attitudinal stuff. What are some of these beliefs we have, or in some cases, non-supportive beliefs that happen as we process those 60,000 thoughts a day? And that's what generates either a healthy mindset or in some cases, a mindset of limitation. I use Winnie the Pooh's example of the character Eeyore, that everything that was done is negative, why bother trying? Then we get into the company and market. Are we in a competitive market? What is our vision of success of our market? And how do we approach that in that way? And by the way, the company that we work for, what's our belief about the company as well? So as you can see, there's a lot upstairs on attitude, and it has to do with us too. What is the mindset about ourselves? What are we doing to improve our mind? What are we doing to improve the body, if you will? Because again, sales or business development takes energy. Spirit, whether it be belief in a higher power or connection to energy, is all about being aligned spiritually. So again, what are we doing things to improve the mind? Are we reading on a consistent basis? Are we exercising? Are we taking care of ourselves? Because again, this does take energy. Let's go down to behavior now. So behavior is about the whole idea of having goals, having a plan, action steps. A couple of rules I'll share with you, Tom. One is around manage behavior, measure results. By managed behavior means that if I want to have a plan to build business, what activities am I doing? And do I have an opportunity to measure some intermediate results to see if I'm on track or not? Because the good news here is if I'm not on track, what can I do? I can change the behavior. This is something we do internally and we've done with our clients time and time again. We want to look at the total goal. What does the sales goal look like or revenue goal look like? And from there, we work the number backwards. What are the key metrics we need to establish before the final business comes in the door? And from there, work back into the behaviors or activities that would lead to those KPIs or key performance indicators. Here's an example. First meetings booked might be a great key performance indicator. For some that rely on referrals, it might be how many referrals we've received is another example. For some that are making outbound dials, or targeted calls, there's another example that how many meaningful conversations have I had as a result of the outreach. Excuse me. So again, final results, we back into KPIs or key performance indicators, and then we get into the behaviors. On the behavior side, we talk about goals, a plan, and actions. Goals. What's astounding to me is that only 3% of people walking this planet have their own goals written out. And it's only 3%. And the saying is, if we don't have our own plan, we're usually part of someone else's. So do we have a written plan about not only business, it could be financial, health, community, all of that is part of having a written plan and having written goals. It's almost like having a bow and arrow, but not having a target to aim for. So in other words, there's no real vision. I don't have an identified target that I'm looking and aiming for. A plan allows me to change it if I'm not getting a measurement of success. And finally, it allows me to fine tune the plan if in fact I need to. That's all about commitment. One of the things we talk about in success and business development is a rule that it's not how we feel that determines how we act. It's how we act that determines how we feel. In other words, when do I feel like going to the gym? Never. You know, we don't feel like going, but I know that if I go, I'm going to feel a lot better. So that's the whole idea of like breaking through and doing what we need to do. You'll notice the word commitment comes up here. Now let's focus on technique. Technique is really literally going to be about when we open up our mouths to say something or write something, do we sound like everybody else? In other words, what is it that we do that creates true differentiation? So what we're telling people to do, especially now, is if you think about what was and has been going on for 6 months or so, is what areas are pressing pause. For example, tomorrow, there's a HIA trade show. And in years past, it's been you walk the aisles, shake hands, exchange cards, borrow somebody's pen to write something down, and all of that's been pressed pause. So what's happening now, what we're seeing for behavioral change is the events and trade shows have been reduced quite a bit. The idea of in-person meetings has been limited. Travel, if you think about catching a flight somewhere, it's not going to be too difficult to do at this point. But you'll see in-person demos has all been changed toward the right, which is all about now video conferencing. You know, exactly what we're doing right now is we are having this type of virtual meeting so that we can talk about business or have meetings virtually for the purpose of being able to still do that and not have to get in the car and drive. Social selling is the next button down, which is really about the idea of using your digital footprint and how to improve in that. We've been asked to talk about this all the time, about your profile, whether it be LinkedIn or any other social media, because now there's more selling that's being done that way. Even cold calling and cold emailing has been another strategy that people have been using. Thought leadership, changing the way that we're running our companies. Are we doing webinars? That's exactly what we're doing now, is a webinar, an online event for your membership. And one-on-one client relationships is really where the focus has been currently. But most importantly now, it's given us a chance for us to really look at the technique we're using and for us to be better at it. And one of the things that comes up is about when we prospect, when we're looking for new business, what does our messaging sound like? How consistent is it? How fine-tuned is it? Does it sound polished? Is it as good as it possibly can be? And we've been telling our clients now more than ever is the time to really hone in and polish that technique to make sure it's absolutely the best that it can be. But now I want to walk through what I call the buyer-seller dance. This is what happens in a typical sale, and I want to give you some alternatives. So the theme of my talk is about those 7 strategies. But think about this, that sales is like a dance. And if the buyer is a better dancer than the seller, it's usually the buyer that's going to be leading throughout the process. And for anybody that's involved with business development, you can see about what happens is this game of control or arm wrestling for who's going to be the one in control during the entire process. So here is the typical salesperson's order. And if you think about the way that anybody sells, this is the way that they've been taught. Get a need, present to the need, attempt to close, handle objections, and then go for the close. And it's sort of like rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, because this is pretty much the pattern that happens here. Now, what's interesting about the dance that the seller has is they're hoping that things don't pop up that screw up the system here. But I'm about to show you that the prospect system is designed exactly to do just that. Let me go to the slide now for the buyer. Because what the buyer does is the buyer may act like as if they're interested. I had an opportunity where my wife needed a piece of furniture for her office. She's a psychoanalyst. And we went to a local furniture store and we knocked, came in the door, and a young lady was greeted us and she said, can I help you? Which we knew would be predictable. Can I help you? And our instant reaction was, no, thanks, I'm just looking. Right? And it's what happens all the time. In other words, don't try to sell me anything, give me space. And that's an initial gut reaction because people love to buy, yet hate to be sold. So first is expressing interest, then we get into, I may act motivated. But what I'm going to do as the buyer is I want to get free information from you. I want to learn everything, what it is that you do, how much it is, what are warranties, how do I install it if I'm going to be installing it, who are people you've worked with, all of the terms and conditions and explaining how things do. But what's dangerous about that for salespeople is they believe and they take that as a buying sign, that if somebody's really interested or acting interested, they must be very interested in me. So the salesperson that's doing it tends to act even more in the best interest of the customer by giving them a lot of what we call unpaid consulting. But then what happens to the buyer is they will say things sort of like a string you along statement of, hey, Tom, great presentation. Thanks so much for sharing me about all your expertise. Certainly you've given us a lot to think about and to consider. We're going to take this information back with us. We're going to meet, really discuss it. I don't see any good reason in the long term why we wouldn't do anything long term. I think probably, maybe, there's a good chance I think we might do something. So in other words, what did I really just say? Not much. In other words, and I often ask this question when I present this in front of groups, is anybody here married, right? And hands go up. And I use the equivalent of, well, if you were walking the aisle with your person you're about to wed, for better or for worse, in sickness and health, was your answer, let me think it over? Or, let me get back to you. Instead, there's no real lack of commitment because the buyers have perfected that by saying these things that might be non-committal. Yeah, okay, let me think it over. Great information you gave me. And then the last button here is they disappear. They literally join the witness protection program. Can't reach them. And I don't know if anybody's ever had that, where we think we've had a great meeting. They seem to be interested, but they say, all right, let me get back to you if we're interested. I think it sounds great. And we get these false hopes, happy ears kick in, and then radio silence, make no contact. They're gone. We call, we get the, I'm sorry, he or she's in the restroom, then Kuala Lumpur, they're not around, they're away for 3 weeks. You want to leave a message. That's pretty much what happens. But now let's put the two systems together, and this is what happens. If we follow the system of the buyer, this is what happens. They express interest, we perceive it as a need. They act motivated, we give a presentation. We give it to them, they take it gladly. We go to close the business. They say, hey, sounds great, or use those smoky words on us. We try to fish out the objections and handle them and overcome them. And then we find they can't take the pressure, they vanish on us. And then we use what's called the follow-up. What happens is our buyer learns a lot for free, and the person doing the business development and selling becomes highly frustrated. Now, I don't know if anybody here has experienced that. I would imagine that some of you have. My job today is to create a sense of awareness as to what happens. But what's so interesting about the model here is this. Our definition of qualified is one that is important, because in the old world of qualify, present, close, needs to be replaced with qualify or disqualify, close, then present. It sounds a little odd, but let me walk you through what that looks like. I'm now going to give you 7 essential steps to master a sales process. Because if you find that you're getting trapped into that buyer-seller dance where you have prospects, I don't know if you've ever had this happen where prospects lied to you or not told the truth. They truly believe they can go to heaven if they do lie to salespeople. But the thing is that if we're not getting the clear picture here, not getting the truth, avoidance, if we're not getting people calling us back, there may be reasons why that's happening. So let me lay out these 7 steps of what it looks like. The first step is all about creating rapport, bonding and rapport. And I often ask this question whenever I work with anybody is, so what is your strategy to create trust with another human being? At the end of the day, for some people involved in finance, banking, lending, all of that is around a relationship of trust. So what is going to be my strategy as a professional to get you to trust me, rather than saying the words, trust me? So it is literally going to be breaking down the defense walls, breaking down the typical patterns of a person selling to disarm a prospect and feel a sense of trust by not feeling the pressure of a sale. The second bullet alludes to what we consider an equal level business stature. In other words, what does the person who's looking to sell need to create? It needs to be a creation of equal level, and it can be done, but it takes some finesse to do that. Another thing is that people buy from people they like and who are like them. If we have someone who may be a different communication style, which they may be direct, very direct and to the point, maybe they're analytical, maybe they're more into relationships and a little bit more rapport there, is the mastery here comes from the ability to recognize and adapt and flex style to suit the prospect. In other words, here's the rule again. People buy from people they like and who are like them. Number 4 refers to the ability to nurture the way that we speak to people. Now I'm in training mode now. If I was sitting with somebody as a potential client, my tonality would be dialed back a little bit more. So as you can see here, this is one of the underlying, what I call one of the underlying factors to a successful process is the ability. Now, is it easy? Well, some people would say, well, yeah, it's easy. Like how many people grew up in sales and got into sales by accident? And it might have been because we were told we're pretty good, we got a gift of gab. But the hard part about this is, well, how do we get people to trust us? We could say, you trust me. I don't know if that works anymore, especially now. So that's strategy number 1. Let's go to number 2. And this is really about the ability to have what we call a mutual agenda. In other words, what is my strategy to create comfort and trust at the same time? So I might say things such as, if I'm on the phone with somebody and I get a meeting, I'm going to sit down with Tom and say, hey, Tom, thanks so much for inviting me in. I appreciate the opportunity. I believe we spoke on the phone and talked about spending about 45 minutes. Does that still work for you? All right. Tom would say, yeah, sure. All right. So let me show you what I'm hoping to accomplish today. Actually, why don't you go first? What are you hoping we talk about today in our meeting for you to say, this was a really good use of my time? And now Tom would tell me what he wants to cover. He might say, I want to know who you worked with. I want to know how you can help me. I want to know what your pricing is. And I'm fine. I'd be happy to do that. And now at this point, I would jump back into role and say, Tom, can I share with you what I'm hoping to accomplish? And Tom would say, sure. My goal today is really not to be presumptuous and make any assumptions about you and your business. It's literally to learn more about where it is currently. And what I mean by that is with regard to your situation, find out where things are, where you'd like them to be, and perhaps we could spend some time talking about the things that might be getting in the way for you. What I tend to do is ask a lot of questions and want to ensure that you're comfortable with that. And Tom would say, sure. And here are 1 or 2 potential outcomes. One is we may find there just isn't a fit between us. What I mean by that is what I have isn't something you may be looking for. I'm going to come out and let you know. I'm hoping to do the same for me. You okay with that? Absolutely. And here's the other side to that, is you may start sitting back in your chair and thinking, this makes sense. How do we begin? In some cases, people ask us, and now out of role, I would define what that process looks like. So you see what I did is I set the agenda for a conversation up front. I appreciate the opportunity to be invited in or to speak to somebody. We nail down the time by committing that we already spoke about spending 45 minutes. I'm confirming it. I want to know from Tom, what's really important? What are you hoping we talk about for this to be a valuable meeting for you? And I'll share what I'm hoping to accomplish. It's not to sell, it's to learn more about the other person, what their situation might be. What are some areas that could be better? And I tend to get there by asking a lot of questions. Are you okay with that? Yep. So I got permission-based stuff going on here. And now you'll notice I said, hey, look, if it ends up that there isn't a fit between us, I'm going to let you know. And I'm hoping you do the same for me. What I'm saying there is, if it's going to be a no, N-O, I'd like to know, K-N-O-W, so I don't have to spin your wheels or mine. In other words, a no is a perfectly acceptable answer as well. And then I define what yes is. And yes is, well, how can business be done? How can people begin to work with you? That is the art of the upfront contract or the mutual agreement. That's strategy number 2. Let's go to strategy 3. These, what I call the real reasons to do business. In other words, we could think all day long about features and benefits, and you can go all over the internet and find why people do business with other companies, and it's all about amazing service and great reputation and great products. And what you find is that that is a part of the brain that's addressed, that is part nestled around the prefrontal cortex and doesn't address the reptilian brain. The reptilian brain is one that feels emotion, much more depth and leverage to that part of it. And it is the gap. It is the gap between where things are currently, that's as is. To be model is what the desired output would be, and that automatically creates this gap, and that's what pain is. Pain is personal, emotional, compelling reasons to change. Let me give an example of a wealth advisor. What might be a pain that a prospect would tell a wealth advisor? They're worried about whether or not they'll have enough money to retire. They're worried that, or frustrated, they may run out of money before they run out of life because their investments aren't being watched, right? Those are examples, right? So we could talk about that all day long, but the impacts is really an important element of this as well. What is the impact by not taking action or staying where they are? And you think about why people stay with CPAs and people stay with banks for fear of change. In some cases, what motivates them is that the gap they have is bigger than the comfort of staying with somebody who we're familiar with. So about the gap, can we help them with it? Let's jump now to what I consider to be number 4. Now, number 4 is all about money. And I talked before about the conceptual issues around money and technical issues. But I'm looking for 2 camps here. I'm looking for somebody who's willing and able to invest. If I have somebody who's not willing but able versus somebody who's unable but willing, which of the 2 is going to be a better prospect? And it's going to be the one who's unwilling and able. Because the person who may love your stuff but can't afford it is what we call a disqualifier. Now, no matter what, they don't have the money. They have empty pockets. They can't afford it. Now, the willingness is they may have the money, but they choose not to spend it with you, to me, provides an opportunity. Now, certainly, if we have somebody who's willing and able, that's the best possible scenario. But I doubt realistically that every prospect that people talk to is really going to be literally in those both camps. One will be very often, all right, I have the money, but show me why I should spend it with you. And that's what takes some finesse in order to do that properly. So are these people willing and able to invest their time, their energy, resources at an organization and people, and money to solve the pain? And that's an interesting thing that comes up all the time. You know, do we feel we have a solution in this range, and how do we deal with the budget cycles? Let's go to number 5. Number 5 is about the ways that people make decisions in an organization. You may be dealing with one person. You may be dealing with a business owner. That's a simple process, but there may be some silent decision makers there, including a CPA, an advisor. But a typical process may mean that there's somebody there that has the power to write the check or sign the purchase order. But then there's also people that might have what we call advocacy, meaning they're a big fan of yours and they'd love to see you succeed. And then there's another category of people that have influence. In the years that I've been training, I've worked with CEOs. And what's interesting about some CEOs is they have people on their team, including their executive assistant, who may be someone who's worked with the CEO for 30 plus years, that has no power, but a heck of a lot of influence. And that's an area where, for the average selling professional, for them to recognize all three axes: power, influence, advocacy. And advocacy is considered to be your champion. That is one person that would ensure and want to make sure that you are successful in your quest to do business at the organization. Number 6, this is now the point where a presentation or fulfillment, we call it, is providing solution options. And the solutions, I believe everybody that sells for a living, whether you own the company or have a team or sell yourself, this is probably where most people shine. They're great at this because they could talk all day long about their solutions. But what are we doing here to connect the dots of the solution that we're helping to solve, at the same token that there's an opportunity here to match the solution with the issue that the prospect's having? Again, that takes finesse. There's such an ability for some people to oversell this, and we try to remain cautious to not oversell, but to provide a solution based on the issues and challenges that we heard. We call it showing evidence. In other words, the performance metrics here is that I believe I can solve these problems, and I'm going to demonstrate it here. But here's the big close. This is where the close happens. The big close is, drum roll please, what would you like to do? That's it. Meaning, what we've done is we have literally qualified or disqualified up to this point. If there's no pain, back to step number 3, no budget, step number 4, and no decision process, step number 5, it allows us to push the eject button and abort mission. In the absence of that we have a qualified prospect because they have a personal, emotional, compelling reason to want to talk to us. There's resources available, although they may not be willing yet, and we have the right people we're talking to, then we're going to go through and demonstrate our proof of concept and then go for the close. Now, one of the steps here is about, well, what happens if they say yes? Right? Because it does happen. People say yes. Do we confirm the agreement? Do we avoid what we call buyer's remorse? I don't know if it's ever happened to anybody where you might have closed a great piece of business and then you get a phone call, starts off with, hey, listen, all right, I know we just gave you a check. I know we just paid you. I need to hold off. I need to think it over. What we call vendor vengeance. In other words, that if you're taking business away from an incumbent vendor, chances are you're not going to get a congratulatory phone call from that vendor. They're going to fight, and they're going to fight hard, probably lowering their price and other things. So how do we avoid that vendor vengeance piece coming up? Do we lock and load on a plan? What does it look like going forward? And does it allow us a chance that, provided that we do deliver what we say we're going to deliver and exceed expectations, that we have earned the right to begin to brainstorm for names of introductions that might be of that our client may give to us. So, a couple more slides. For anybody that's involved in business development, here's a couple of checklist items I'm giving to you. First and foremost, I call this a pre-call plan. What are you hoping to accomplish on the call or on the meeting? What's the goal? What does it look like? Who else is involved in our meeting? How much time did we nail down for our meeting? Is it a 15-minute demo? Is it an hour-and-a-half meeting? What decisions are we looking? That might be interim steps here. And the last one talks about, did we really truly double check everything we needed to do to make sure that we've got everything buttoned up so there's no loose ends that get misunderstood? So I don't know about how many of you are remote selling right now. And this is a real challenge for some people who used to going out and pressing the flesh with a handshake and a slap on the back and that kind of stuff. But it's now become more about remote selling and what are some best practices. I do want to spend a couple of minutes on this because now more than ever, this is what's become a real hot topic for us. Setting work boundaries, if you're working from home, avoiding distractions, having a regular routine if you can is a really important part. The setup you see on the screen is actually my home office. I've got a Monster monitor, then another one, then a couple of other devices that I use. There's a couple of lights around me as well. Fancy dancy background here, which is a green screen. So all of that can be done. Very often I'm asked this question about, well, what can I be doing on all 4 areas of my business now? For those of you that have existing companies, it's about keeping clients longer. It's about, at the same time, looking for new business. There's also an opportunity to go to old clients and former clients and look to re-engage with them. And then finally, the ability to expand opportunities within certain, what I call rockstar accounts. So there's all four areas of here that can be addressed. One is around, if you have a list of your clients and customers, is there are client retention factors. There's some key factors that will ensure that you keep that client around longer. Why? Because we've learned that your best customer is someone else's best prospect. And what is the strategy we have to keep those clients around longer? And that means, well, here's some examples. How easily do we communicate with them? What's their perception of the value that we provide for them? Are they constantly innovating and coming up with new ideas? How about level of dependence? How dependent is my client on me? You know, we call that the quarterback principle. You know, do they come to me if they need the name of somebody or a recommendation? That's creating more value. And that's what keeps us around a lot longer with those accounts. I don't know about this as much as what I've heard is about, you know, outreach to clients, outreach to customers, but not just picking up the phone. It's literally about what can we do for them? Is there something we can offer to them? Resources that would help them be okay in their business. And really finding ways to truly help them, not just giving lip service, not the old, hey, I was thinking about you, thought I'd give you a call. Is if we're going to do that, what are some extra things we can bring to the table that they would find valuable? And then defining credibility. Credibility is really about getting over ourselves and not making it about us, but making it about them. Credibility is saying things seemingly not in our own best interest prior to saying everything in our own interest. Up on Attain, on the upper right-hand side, I talked about the idea of first seeking to help people. That's my goal. And again, it's a great opportunity for me to master my tools and strategies. Some of you may look at this and say, you know what, I could use some help on my technique and look on my tools. We're certainly reachable to have a conversation about that. Having a behavior cookbook, if you remember before, I talked about the whole idea of having goals and having a plan and actions. But in order to do this am I actually doing what I say I'm going to do? Am I going on LinkedIn? Am I connecting with 5 people? Am I in touch with former clients? Am I running executive sessions that might bring some prospective clients in? You know what things you need to do. The question is if you're doing them. Give first. I believe in the world of social selling that people love to buy yet hate to be sold. Connect with people first is really the whole mantra here. And then the prospect's first impression of you. Are we seen as a vendor, a business partner, or trusted advisor? Go down to recapture. There's a lot of opportunity here as well. You know, contacting former clients, inactive clients, past clients, offer to help them understand their world. Some context is the real reason we began working together 10 years ago. I am going to have and bring a lot of humble pie to the menu, but I want to stay carefully aligned to what's going on in their world as being another partner of theirs. And who knows, you know, you may lead to having people re-engage. Expand is all about the ability to find those accounts that you know there's more that could be done. There's more business opportunities, maybe a new wing, maybe new prospect within an organization. If we're there, we always keep our eye out for learning what's going on within the organization that is our client and look for opportunity there. I call this tact, planning, and value proposition. Having tact, not overselling, planning, do I know how I'm going to go about it if I believe there's another opportunity for us? And a value prop is a 4-legged stool. Your value proposition is what your product or service is, what it does for your client or customer, what the benefit is to your client or customer, and how the benefit is measured. Now, do I have industry and professional knowledge? I most certainly hope that I do. And I have to really be able to establish true value for any of my clients. So if you hear about this, this is another one that comes up all the time for me when the old objections come up. Objections meaning I call them opinions. They're not necessarily objections because objections denotes, you know, get out your baseball bat, we're fighting. It's all about my opinion. It might be on price. Why are you guys so much more expensive than ABC company? We're not in the market right now. We're busy. We're very happy with who we're working with. Are typical objections that we hear all the time. And the question for everybody here is, especially now, how polished are we in how we answer those questions and learn more about why somebody would bring that point up or ask that question. One last final thing I want to talk about is at the end of a meeting, if you can get into the habit, you'll notice I've got bookends here. The first is pre-call, and now it's post-call. If I finished a meeting with somebody, I ask them these questions. What were the pain indicators? Or was it real pain? In other words, a pain indicator is a symptom, all right? Slow lead time is a pain indicator. Why it's happening is real pain. Do we believe we have a good solution that can help us? What's their decision process? Do they have the willingness, time, money, and resources to solve it? And what was the clear future decided at the end of the meeting or end of the phone call? I call that MACNS. That stands for mutually agreed clear next step. What is it that we agree and are aligned with as a clear next step so that we avoid the nebulous outcome or mutual mystification where we don't know what is just about to happen? And I think one of the most important ones to anticipate is, hey, what could go wrong? Like, are we having that conversation within a company or asking ourselves, have I really given thought to this as to what can go wrong here? So as you can see, I barreled through this to kind of give you a top level view. Normally, under normal circumstances, we have participation where there's answers back and forth. Today it's condensed, but I wanted to share with you that we did find the 7 steps of creating rapport, having mutual agreements up front, so we set expectations, finding the real reasons to do business by asking great questions, by having a money step or conversation about budget, by discovering a decision process and how it works, now our presentation based on the criteria of pain, and finally, an insurance policy to keep it closed and avoid buyer's remorse through the post-sale step. So what does this whole selling thing mean? Philosophically speaking, sales is not about convincing another person. It really literally doesn't work. Great selling is defined as the moment when your prospect repeats back to you something you help them to discover that they themselves may not have been aware of. So with that, I want to turn it back to you, Tom. I hope the session was helpful for you.
Rob, that was excellent. Excuse me 1 second here. They're not coming for me.
No, that's good.
But excellent, excellent presentation. And, you know, a couple of things I'm just in listening, it's so important that you talk about that upfront agreement and getting that out of the way. There are so many people that, you know, they waste a lot of time going through that whole process. And like you say, that follow-up goes on for months when the person had no desire really to become a client in the first place.
Yeah. If they're not qualified, we move on. And,
yeah.
And what's interesting about this, Tom, is what I call SPS, is called skinny pipeline syndrome. For people that don't really prospect consistently, they have only a couple of opportunities. And what starts to happen there is they become very hopeful and they start to get very needy and they tie themselves to an outcome, to the sale, and not necessarily a process for qualifying or disqualifying. In other words, they've gone from playing to win to playing not to lose. So they cut corners and they start to sound more desperate. They say to themselves, yeah, I got to close this piece of business. We got a skinny pipeline. I got 2 deals in the pipeline. I got to close this. I got to make my month. And as a result, they sound very needy. We call this having commission breath.
Yeah. It's a scarcity versus abundance type of mindset. And like you say, you know, when you listen to what you're saying and you follow a process, you know, you can make those decisions up front. You're not chasing somebody and get on to somebody else who's more qualified. Yeah.
Exactly.
Very good. Again, we want to thank you, Rob. Excellent. And again, for everyone who's watching, please go on. Rob had done an earlier presentation for us, and we hope that in the future that we can have Rob come back. We're going to be looking, Rob, we're going to be launching a podcast here that we hope maybe we can bring you back and have further discussions with you.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay. We also, with that, we want to thank Erica Chase and the Farmingdale Small Business Development Center who has partnered with us and who's helped us out during the Babylon Business Bootcamp. Again, babylonisback.com. If you go to that website, you can see the library of videos we do have and all the things that I think right now that would help a lot of the businesses that are out there. So please tune in. Next week will be our final, we don't have a date right now, but will be our final webinar. And we hope that everyone tunes in, and we want to thank everybody for tuning in and watching these videos. Again, Babylon Business Bootcamp, and you can get there by babylonisback.com. So again, Rob, thank you so much. We look forward to speaking with you again in the future, and we appreciated your presentation today. So thank you.
My pleasure, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Have a great day, everyone.